welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Nonprofit Show. I'm really excited to have one of the icons of thought leadership in the nonprofit sector here with us today, Herb Paine, CEO of Paine Consulting. He's going to be talking to us about the spinning wheel in nonprofit education, how we train up our own and our leaders, and what we need to be doing to rethink this. I have to witness, Herb, I've been a fangirl of yours for many years, and across the trajectory of my career, inevitably I would be asked to speak at something or other, just like you. And it always ended up that if I saw Herb Paine, I was always like, crap, if I have to go on after him, I'm going to be a disaster. And so I'd always be like, where's Herb Paine in this mix? And so anyway, it's just a thrill to have you on with us so that we can be chatting and really learning more about what your thoughts are on this. You know, we have a lot of thoughts every day that we get to explore with people like Herb Paine because of our amazing presenting sponsors. They include Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Holdings, Nonprofit Banking, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and JMT Consulting. I'm Julia C. Patrick, CEO of the American Nonprofit Academy. More importantly, Herb Paine, CEO of Paine Consulting. You can really delve into Herb's thought leadership on upyournonprofit.substack.com. Wow. Okay, Herb, welcome.
Thank you. So delighted to be here, Julia. Thank you.
I'm really excited to talk to you about this. Over the trajectory of your career, you've seen a lot in the training space of how we try to get our nonprofit leaders moving forward in a professional way that allows them to be more successful with their mission. So I'm really excited to hear about this. And let's just start off right out the gate. You say that we're spending too much time on existing systems when we talk about training our nonprofit teams. What do you mean by this?
I think context is important in answering this question. The motivation for my writing that article, and actually for my forthcoming book, Up Your Nonprofit, is that we're in a state of dynamic change, unlike I think any we've seen before, in a period of great disruption, where the future is really advancing farther than our organizations are able to adapt. And so when I see in both the learning practices and the consulting rooms of nonprofit organizations, practices that I think really need to be challenged. So my objective here is to challenge the premises, the assumptions, and the practices of the nonprofit business model, because I think they no longer really fit the future. And so what I talk about and mentioned was that a lot of what's going on in these spaces of learning is performative, but it's about doing better, but not really engaging in systemic change. And that's what concerns me the most, particularly when I think we have a crisis that involves redefining how we care, how we create caring communities. And our nonprofits really effectively organized to do more than symptomatic relief, but to really engage in true systemic change.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's like a hair and fire moment, because that is a complete redefinition of nearly 250 years of our nation's approach to the nonprofit sector, right? Or charitable behavior, whatever you want to call it. So, wow. Okay. Well, good on you for kind of painting this picture, because this is a huge issue. And I want to talk about this a little bit more in the context of training managers and people that are leading, the task management side, almost, if you will, versus transformative leaders. And where do you see that coming into play?
It's about what defines leadership and what the nature of these leadership development programs are. What I see is really inculcating executive directors in established practices, rather than really dynamic learning sessions where we're engaging leaders in thinking through the models that they're working, thinking through what roles they can play in transformation, thinking through what governance really means. And are we stuck in the frame of always trying to argue what the appropriate board executive relationship is, rather than really rethinking what should governance be in,
Yeah.
in the nonprofit organization? Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of scary sense. I'm going to witness to you. When we booked you on, I knew that Saturday I'm doing a board retreat training day for a very important organization in my community and your community, because we're from the same community. And I was like, oh my God, please, Herb Paine, don't disrupt my brain, because I got to work for a whole day on Saturday and I don't want to doubt myself. And so what I got to thinking about as I was, going through preparing and everything, I was dying to ask you this question, because one of my big root questions is, do we have this conversation now because we haven't had formal education in nonprofit leadership across the university system? I'll talk about it that way, until really like not even the last 20 years, because we're taking people that were probably educated for different things,
Yes.
and then we're putting them into the nonprofit sector, which is a little willy-nilly and not always perfectly defined. Like if you and I were talking about managing an architectural firm,
Yeah.
we would pretty much have been educated in architecture, engineering, business management, and we would have the same nomenclature and we would have the same pretty much philosophies.
Right.
But in the nonprofit sector, we don't have this. And so I'm kind of curious as to, if we back up and we talk about this leadership and this knowledge gap, is it because we haven't started at the same place? Or do you think that has nothing to do with it?
I think we started in the wrong place. I think there's a habit of the heart of the nonprofit sector that, well, let's talk about the traditional retreat. What are we doing with executives and boards in those retreats? We go through mission, we go through vision, we go through values, we talk about developing a strategic plan. And ultimately, what happens is, and I've said this often, we end up with plans that are neither strategic nor planful.
Right.
We end up with plans that end up being more tactical than strategic. When it comes to leadership, we're positioning executives to be subordinate to rather than equal with the board. And the problem, look, I've gone into so many organizations where we've done this kind of work, only to find that the organizations at risk, where things never really stuck, no matter how many retreats there were, they're at risk because A, they're not aligned around a shared vision.
Right.
B, they've overextended themselves in the interests of some idealistic, or they've overextended themselves. Then there's indebtedness. And ultimately what I find is boards that are asleep at the wheel or didn't know what they were supposed to do in any case. And so the organization flounders. And with all due respect to executive directors, you and I know that many of them are compelled to, I think as a matter of habit, adopt for-profit corporation practices that don't necessarily fit the nature of a nonprofit organization and what's in business to do. And so they don't have degrees in public administration or business administration. Sometimes they're promoted from program officers or fundraising officers to executive directors. With all due respect to them, we have to ask, what really are the skill sets and competencies and perspectives that are essential to moving these organizations forward in a new and dynamic way?
Mm-hmm. I love that you said that, because you're spot on. I agree with you 100%. And I think that we're looking at, boards look at who has the most passion and emotion for the mission, and they forget that that's all well and good, but that's only going to take you so far down the path. You got to have somebody that has the skill set to lead and to understand what that leadership might entail.
But I think that also ends up reframing the position of an executive in the context of a redefined and redesigned or transformative nonprofit organization. One of the things that I'm concerned about when it comes to governance is that for all the work that we do in defining roles, responsibilities, mutual accountabilities, whether it's board source or the Carver governance model, whatever we're doing is the board ultimately has no accountability to anybody. That's troubling. Even in the best of organizations, there's no guarantee that at some point the dysfunctions of governance will occur. What I'm more concerned about is rethinking who governs, who's at the table, and how do we engage those people who are most affected by the policies and actions of organizations to be immersed in part of the decision-making process. That, I think, is going to be a critical part of the reinvention of what we call nonprofit organizations, particularly as we think about how we use new technological forms in driving our organizations.
Yeah, I love this, and I think you're absolutely spot on. It's a heavy question, and I want to move on to like the next big piece of this that I see as an influence, and that is this rigidity and the risk adverse issue, like how we're afraid. So many nonprofit leaders and boards are literally fearful to
Yeah.
move forward on risk, and they don't understand it. But it becomes like a push pull. I hear this all the time. The CEO or the executive director will be like, "I really think we should do this," and they're the expert, and then the board is just like can't get behind it, can't support it, waits to watch it fail, kind of thing.
Right.
So how do you see this risk adversity impacting us?
Oh, tremendously. Think about this. I think you're right that it is more likely that it is the executive staff of an organization that wants to take steps forward to be more innovative. But think about how the board was composed. At the very least, it may have been a matter of recruiting people with deep pockets or social contacts or champions of the organization, or whatever, rather than thinking about, again, what are the skill sets, the competencies, the perspectives are going to be required to really pay due stewardship, due duty of care to the organization and the people for whom the organization is working. One of the major principles, I believe, is that the board is the stewards on behalf of the clientele or the stakeholders or the whatever patients, students, whoever they're serving. They sometimes forget that. The other reality is this, Julia. I remember facilitating a discussion among members of the board of a state commission on the arts. Doesn't necessarily have to be in Arizona, by the way. And one of the outcomes of the discussion was that they could not speak in defense of the arts because the corporate interests that they represented professionally might have policies adverse to the principles that the organization wanted to promote at the state capitol. When I worked with the United Way system, was executive director of the United Way of California for several years. And I recall that I wanted to advance legislation in the state capitol in Sacramento that would be forward-looking, that would change policy regarding childcare and the like. My board was made of very distinguished members of the corporate community.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
They bucked on some of these things because their corporation, whether it was IBM or Intel or Hewlett Packard, it was, you can't move, Herb, you can't move forward on this. So I had to kind of finesse my way through the legislature. But that's part of the problem. It's what is the understanding of stewardship on part of the boards and who actually is at the table in boardsmanship.
Right. I love that you said that because absolutely. I think that a lot of times, board cultivation will be like, oh my God, we got XYZ person from a Fortune 100. And then they don't realize that those individual, voting members are hogtied by their corporate situation.
Right.
which they're not going to be able to, definitely, or take a path that might be outside exactly what you said, the confines of the stated structure for which they represent, because they have to represent that entity first,
They
especially
have to,
when they're looking at, probably, supporting financially, bringing in other social interest partnerships. I mean, the demands of those larger scale corporate board members are there. They're real. We don't talk about them. We
that's
don't
right.
talk about them,
We
but we
can tell them in detail about duties of care, duties of loyalty, duty of obedience,
right.
stewardship. And they can walk out of that boardroom, that retreat room, just totally engaged in those concepts. And a week later, it's dissipated.
I agree.
Dissipated.
I agree. And I also know of board members, that I've worked with where their leaderships actually called them into the office and said, look, we caught wind of this. You can't do it, or you got to leave. Or, I mean, this is a real thing. This
Yeah.
is a real push pull that goes on. And if you don't take a look at this before you impanel somebody or seat somebody on your board, it's a really big thing. And again, this is a long-term strategic thing. I want to spend some time kind of on the same arc of this discussion about community-driven decision making,
Yes.
because I find this really, I want to say, to me, when I see this written, Herb, I think of like the horrible white savior situation where board members are like, they're going to tell these people that they serve how to do it,
Right.
without ever understanding that journey that their clients are on. Is this kind of that same issue that we're talking about?
Yeah. I think this notion, and I know there are political parties who are accused of telling people what they want rather than asking them what they want. But I do think
Sure.
this is part of the issue. When board members presume to make decisions on behalf of a clientele or a constituency without the engagement of that constituency. Look, I'd rather have in a retreat not only the members of the board but the staff and key stakeholders,
Yeah.
people from the community. And I know there are community-based models of governance. I mean, there were in the community development block grants, I recall, there was a requirement that 50% of the board becomes constituted of board members and 50% of community. Well, I would like to expand that some. I'd like to see that the voices of the people most affected at whatever level, whether it's in behavioral health, the arts, or whatever, that they're engaged and involved in informing the decision-making processes that affect them. How much richer that would be ultimately than this hierarchical model where we're spending more time talking about why boards bleed into the role of the executive or the executive bleeds into the role of the board. I mean, we're spinning our wheels here,
Yeah.
and we got to stop it because the community demands more of us who believe in public service, in caring for the community.
Yeah,
We
I
need to do a
agree.
better job.
Yeah, we could do a better job. I think that's one of the heartbreaking things, Herb, is that, you see people, well-intentioned people wanting to serve their communities, stepping up, saying, I'm going to volunteer for this position that has a fiduciary issue that is very public many times without really being educated. They're thrown into an environment that they might not really understand what the problem is or what the average client goes through or experiences. I'm a big thing when I talk to boards. One of my big things is, first and foremost, where do you meet? If you're meeting at a swanky, conference room at the top floor of some high rise, you need to be meeting at the shelter that you you work.
Right. And think about it. This is exactly the kind of conversation that we ought to be having in the learning spaces. And if we dial back to what we were talking before, whatever kind of conference it is, and I know in my article I enumerated several examples, we take people through the same things. If you're an executive or a board member, we're going to take you through rules of governance, fundraising, marketing, but we're just repackaging and regurgitating stuff that really isn't an essential and critical element to the operation of a nonprofit organization that is dynamically responding to community. So for me, no matter how much repackaging we do, it's not really getting to the core issue of how do we position ourselves for a future that's on top of us.
Right, right. Well, I find it really interesting. I one time met with an executive director on this very topic, and he said, I said, why are you meeting outside of your campus? And he said, oh, well, it's in a dangerous part of town, and our board members, I don't think would come to the meetings. And I said, well, wait a minute.
Right.
You're asking your employees, your team, yourself, and your clients. Your clients are coming through to this environment. And so it seems to me that if your board can't see what this looks like, they're going to make decisions with the information that they have that's not very realistic. And,
So,
and
you're right. And so it occurs to me that we ought to be thinking about what the educators are teaching. Look, with all due respect to my fellow consultants, and I know some of this may feel contrary to their interests, or that I'm dissing them. I'm not. What I think I'm saying about consultants and classrooms is that we have been locked into a system. The system almost defines the way we're supposed to present, what topics we're supposed to present. It's the norm. Instead of the system, whether it's the educators at the nonprofit classes in universities who are holding conferences, or state associations, it's incumbent upon them to rethink the design of their learning spaces. Otherwise, this stuff continues to spin around and around, and everybody's locked into the same old game.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I see that 100%. I absolutely see that 100%. And I think that it is also those consultants and educators to the same degree that haven't stepped into what the path of these organizations are.
So think about this. This is a little risky to say, but we talked about what were the skill sets, training, and background of executives in nonprofit organizations. What's the typical origin, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, let's think too about consultants. You and I know that there are many consultants who did not have consultative training, but who came to it having either retired or been, removed or from their nonprofit positions, and they take up the mantle of consultant. Well, you get what you pay for. And my concern is that we need to really help the consultant community break out of that stricture and think about how do we engage our clients, not just more honestly, but almost transformatively, to say, you want a retreat, you want us to have a retreat. Let's rethink the design of this in a way that you've never done. We are not going to go through mission, vision, values. Let's talk about the value proposition of this organization. Let's talk about who's at the table here. Yeah, those kinds of things, Julia, to me, we almost need like a training school for consultants, according to my vision of things. I don't mean to sound unhumble.
Well, no, I agree with you. And I think that, I think sometimes when you're a leader and you look around in the nonprofit space and you're like, I can't get my board to row in the same direction. Right. It's like a logical thing to say, oh, well, we need training.
Right.
And it's like, okay, check that box.
Right.
And it's really a hard thing. It's like understanding training for what? What is it?
So then it becomes a matter of who has the authority and credibility to drive the change. And so I think if there's a risk aversion among executives or boards, then to whom do we look for in terms of leadership and guidance? And that takes me to the philanthropic community.
Okay,
for the
good.
philanthropists to begin rethinking. I know that they have restricted funds, they're donor restricted. I understand all of that. But I remember talking to a group of foundation professionals and urging them to think about how they can bend the arc, to not be so constricted that they can't be the leaders in driving institutional change.
Right. And I think that what you just said is a magical, magical thing. I think that this is where we take that concept of trust philanthropy and, capacity, and we really move it through, and we look at how we can educate and get better leaders. I mean, you and I are blessed to live in a community with a major, major foundation,
Yes.
the Piper Foundation,
Yes.
Virginia G. Piper, who was, by the way, that money came from tech. It was phone technology, car phone technology,
Good old technology.
good old technology from back in the days, but it was revolutionary.
Yes.
Their little humble company was called Motorola, because
Yes.
the rotary dial in a car, Motorola, and they've gone on to become, a huge, huge proponent of thought leadership and board leadership training.
Yeah.
It's really an interesting trajectory, not just, fire hosing money at problems, which they certainly spend a tremendous amount of money in our community, undoubtedly for problems, but they're taking a big chunk of their money and spending it on leadership training. And I think that's
Uh-huh.
really bold, because it changes the dynamic between a lot of these funder relationships in many ways.
I
Little
think you're
challenge.
right. I think the question is, what's the content of that leadership training?
Correct.
It would be interesting to explore exactly what that means,
Yeah.
because when you think about most of the leadership programs that have been developed, so many of them really are not about leadership as much as they are about social networking and informing people about, the utilities and fire departments and police departments. That's not leadership development. You got to be
Yeah.
thinking about empathy. You've got to be thinking about what it means to have a vision, and there are other qualities of leadership that need to be addressed. Anyway,
Yeah.
it would be interesting to know what they're doing.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, and again, it speaks to the issue of how do we train our leaders? How do we get that discussion up and moving forward so that we can build stronger nonprofits? Wow, it has just been such a delight to have Herb Paine on the Nonprofit Show. I told my team, I'm like, oh my God, we scored Herb Paine. He's going to come on and probably rock my world, but in a good way. So thank you so much.
Look, I really appreciate your having me. This is a discussion that I did this because I want to start a conversation, not just about leadership development, but about the nonprofit business model. And if I may, this will be the focus of upyournonprofit.com and of my forthcoming book, surprise, Up Your Nonprofit. Julia, thank you so much for having me. I hope this stimulates others to think about the issues that we've talked about. I really appreciate the time you've given me.
Well, it's just been a pleasure. And like I said, you are such a treasure
Thank you.
to our sector. Certainly, I'm blessed to have you in our community, but to the sector at large, it's really cool that we have thought leaders like you who stand up and say, hey, wait a minute, everybody, let's think about this in a different way. You can read some of Herb's just amazing work and thought leadership on upyournonprofit.substack.com. And you need to take some quiet time to focus in on what he's writing and what he's thinking about, because I can guarantee it will change the way you think about your nonprofit. Just amazing. Hey, I'm just throwing it out there, my friend, but when your book is published, we need to have you come back and we'll do a book launch on the Nonprofit Show.
That's a promise.
All right. I'm holding you to it. Hey, we get amazing support to have thought leaders like Herb Paine on the Nonprofit Show. And they come from Bloomerang, American Nonprofit Academy, Staffing Boutique, Holdings Nonprofit Banking, Interim Executives Academy, Your Part-Time Controller, Fundraisers Friday, and JMT Consulting. What a pleasure. You've totally revved my engines. I'm not, I have so much more to explore with you on this topic, and we're going to get you back, my friend. Thank you.
Thank you.
As we end each and every episode of the Nonprofit Show, we leave with this message, and I'm hearing it in a different way today with Mr. Herb Paine. And the message is simple, but it's very, very arduous. And it goes like this: to stay well so you can do well. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you again.